to the Select Committee, sir.
The Honourable Amy Adams.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I do want to take a call just to respond to a couple of the issues that have been raised by a number of speakers around Clause 11 of the bill and the international obligations, and I'll certainly come to that. Let me just start, though, by pointing out to the last speaker, in respect of his concerns around Clause 17, that Clause 17 is not in Part 1 of the bill. It's in Part 1A, which we will be debating next. So I'm more than happy for him to return and make a contribution in that part, and we can address that there. Clause 11 of the bill and the wording of the international obligations, it's very valid that the House consider this carefully because it is an important part of the bill, but I want to get a few things on record. The first of those is simply repeating from opposition contributions in the debate that it's not consistent doesn't take us any further. What I have said repeatedly is that actually the advice that we have from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, who are, after all, New Zealand's agencies, New Zealand's agency that has the responsibility for understanding and monitoring our compliance with our international obligations, have repeatedly made it very clear, both to the committee and to myself, that the bill, actually before the changes and certainly again with them, complies with our international obligations in all respect. And the point, sir, that the committee has to take into account, and as I have said repeatedly, is that it has to be looked at holistically. Sir, the issue is that Part 12 of the Convention itself, while it's an important part of the Convention, it must be read in the context of the rest of the Convention, the majority of which addresses use of the oceans, including exploitation of living and non-living resources, marine research and navigation. In relation to UNCLOS provisions on the use of the oceans, particular note should be made of Articles 56 and 77 that explicitly refer to a coastal state's sovereign right to explore and exploit the natural resources in its EEZ and continental shelf. And, sir, the view goes on to express the fact that it is the obligation of states, in the light of particular circumstances, to attempt to strike an appropriate and reasonable balance between all of the interests. And, sir, that is exactly what the very nature of this bill does. We have clear advice to the committee, we have clear advice to this House, or through me to this House, from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade's legal team, that that's what the bill does. We had a legal submission to the Select Committee, I understand, from Simpson Grierson that made the same point. And so if the opposition want to continue to assert that it doesn't meet the obligations, then they should find a legally qualified person who is expert in this area to say so. And until then, the information that we've put on the table, I think, has to be taken at face value. I want to also talk about the comments that have been made around the wording in the SOP in respect of Clause 11, which is to continue. I'm just going to flick to that page quickly. Which I can never find when I'm put. Continue or enable the implementation of New Zealand's obligations. Now, a number of members have raised concerns with that wording, and I simply point out to those members that that is a very well-used expression in this chamber and exists currently already in this space in the Maritime Transport Act, the Fisheries Act, the Marine Mammals Protection Act, amongst others. So we're not talking about some new way of doing things. This is an established way of reflecting New Zealand's international obligations, and I suggest that those members consider the framework that already exists in this House and the appropriateness of it. And I further want to make the point that actually the reason that concern was raised around the initial drafting of Clause 11 and the reason we haven't done what some members are suggesting and simply put the words automatically into this bill actually comes in large part from the submission, or certainly it is reflected in the view of the submission of the Legislation Advisory Committee, who are at the end of the day the experts on legislation and present from a very unbiased, objective and highly respected view, that to do that would be entirely inappropriate. They made the point that it is not appropriate to build in these sorts of conventions and interpretation aids. The purpose of these obligations and the way to approach them is to ensure that we set up frameworks in our own domestic legislation as standalone frameworks that in and of themselves give effect to our obligations. And that is what this bill does. That's what MFAT has confirmed it does. That's what the legal advice of the committee confirmed was the case. So I say to opposition members again, rather than just say there and continually to repeat it's inconsistent, come up with someone who is prepared to say that, who is an expert in these matters, because the experts we've talked to, who are in charge of this matter, repeatedly say this is the appropriate way to handle it. MFAT have said it, Simpson-Grierson have said it, the LAC have said it. So I simply say to members, rather than continue to look for reasons, Mr Chairman, continue to look for reasons to object to a bill the members clearly simply do not want to pass, they should put some meat on the bones of their submissions. We have done that. We have made the point as to why we're doing it. We've provided the evidence to back that up. And members opposite need to do the same rather than come up with more and more spurious reasons to simply not want to back this legislation. If you don't want to back the legislation, Labor members should simply say that. Don't try and come up with unjustified obligations.
Eugenie Sage.
Mr Chair, the Green Party also believes that this bill should be referred back to Select Committee.